These are all things designed to set us on a long-term growth trajectory.
Are economists feeling optimistic that the Canadian economy is showing its strongest growth since the summer of 2013? Not everyone is convinced sunny days are ahead. We look into the fortunes of Canada's working poor next. I'm Lorna Dueck.
And I'm Sheldon Neal.
And you're watching Context.
I'm actually in the camp that's worried.
Sheldon Neal speaks to Amanda Lang on Canada's economy and if the future really spells more money in your pocket.
They're very, very invisible in our society.
The working poor in Canada, who are they? We speak to John Stapleton, the researcher who set the definition for working poor. That's ahead. And tackling poverty on a practical level in Canada. What are the steps needed to turn the tide? And here are just some news stories that caught our attention. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting after a horrific chemical attack in Syria took the lives of at least 20 children and 52 adults.
Even beautiful little babies, their deaths was an affront to humanity.
Clinics helping the patients were also targeted by airstrikes. The Syrian government denies all allegations. Russia, Syria's ally, is claiming Syrian warplanes struck a chemical weapons depot. Britain, France, and the U.S. are pushing the Security Council to adopt a resolution condemning the attack. They also want the Syrian government to provide flight logs to international investigators. More warnings. The world is facing the largest humanitarian crisis since 1945. More than 20 million people are at risk of starving in 4 different countries. The outgoing head of the UN World Food Program says she is certain U.S. Congress will reject the Trump administration's proposed budget cuts for UN programs. Famine is already declared in South Sudan, with Yemen and Somalia next. The UN is reaching over 80 million people with emergency aid. Next week, we have a whole show on this crisis from our own Molly Thomas on the ground with famine workers in Somalia with special reports. John Meredith appeared before the Senate's Ethics Committee in camera for the first time.
Whether it's self-inflicted or orchestrated.
The Pentecostal pastor's alleged sex encounters with a teenage girl have sparked outrage across the country and in the Red Chamber, many calling for his resignation or outright expulsion. Meredith says his actions were a moral failing and he does not believe he should resign. Members of the committee will now decide on an appropriate sanction after he was found in violation of 2 sections in the senator's code of conduct. That's what's in the news. Now, the Liberal government released their latest federal budget to mixed reviews with no plan announced to balance the books. Running further deficits continue to be part of this country's future. That's bad news, some economic insiders say. Our Sheldon Neal spoke to Amanda Lang for more.
How would you describe the economic forecast of this country?
I'm actually in the camp that's worried about the current thinking around deficits. There are different schools of thought, and when you are in crisis, worrying about balancing your books is not necessarily the thing you should focus on. And we all know this. If your car breaks down and you need it for work, you will go into debt in order to fix your car. That's just good common sense. We're now actually getting back into a mentality of deficits over decades. And the problem for that is it's not just that we pay the price. We're actually, of course, delivering debt to the next generation. We already have a demographic problem. The next generation is already going to be a smaller tax base, and we're burdening them with a bigger sized debt. So we went through such hard times in the 90s with Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin to right-size our debt and deficits. And Canadians, I think, really got it. And I'm just a little worried that we're kind of losing that mentality of live within your means.
Now let's put a face to this. In your estimates, who is winning and who is losing economically in this country?
The winners are what I call the investor class. People that have money to put into the markets are doing well. And the reason for that is we've had this these asset bubbles, stock markets being one of them, and housing being another, that have been fueled by record low interest rates. And guess who pays for record low interest rates? It's the broader tax base. It does not come without cost. It comes, with a great cost. So we're actually seeing a bit of a wealth transfer from taxpayers who can't invest to taxpayers who can invest.
The unemployment rate in this country is at its lowest in more than 2 years. February alone brought a really good mix of part-time and full-time jobs. In fact, Canada has added over 23,000 full-time jobs over the past year versus over 52,000 part-time jobs. But despite these numbers, wage increases and hours worked continue to drag in this country. What is needed to turn this around?
When you see labor markets this tight based on the data, you should start to see wages increase. It just should work that way. And it may actually improve because of some changes we've made in immigration policy. So you can hate what Trump is doing on immigration, but people are going to have to pay native-born Americans to do jobs they didn't want to do. And the same is true in Canada. When we change the temporary foreign workers file, it means you can't import cheaper labor. Therefore, if people need more to do jobs like picking tomatoes, you're going to have to pay them. But there's something else that's probably going on. We've seen the rise of part-time, and we've also seen the rise, of course, of the so-called Uber economy. People who are working for themselves, who may be sort of off the grid a little bit, and that actually has a depressive effect on the overall wage picture because we're not capturing all of the activity in there. The hope is that as the economy grows and as profits grow at corporations, that wages will go up as well.
How do we turn the tide economically for this country's most vulnerable? I'm talking the working poor, and even those who perhaps are making more than an average of $3,000 to $22,000, $24,000 a year. They're making more than that annually, but still struggling to make those ends meet. How do we turn the tide for them in such an uncertain Canadian labor market?
When we talk about housing in this country, we have to solve the housing bubble before it actually has a really dramatic effect on the overall economy. If we get a housing market collapse, it could affect the whole economy. But the thing we talk less about, although we're doing it more now, is affordable housing. The thing that these high-priced homes have done is drive people out of the market. People need to be able to have a roof over their head. It's a basic human right. The other thing that horrifies me that we have not had a good solution for is the amount of hunger in this country. 1 in 5 young children going hungry regularly. Unacceptable in Canada. So we can solve for these things. When you talk about kind of the dwindling labor pool, despite the fact that corporations are going to make a lot of money, we may have to start to think about things like a guaranteed annual income. We may actually have to start to think about just transferring the wealth. Let's get housing and food security right.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Okay, Sheldon, I love that interview when you have a business analyst saying 1 in 5 children being in poverty in Canada is unacceptable. So she's saying get that food security right, get that housing right. What have you got on that idea of what's going to go? How is that going to turn around?
Yeah, I want to talk about food security. She touched about that in the interview that you just saw. I want to start with the definition. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, number 2, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. But I want to unpack this. Let's go to our second board here. Food bank usage. Over 850,000 Canadians use food banks every month. Now, this is up 28% since 2008. 36% are children and youth. 45% are on social assistance. And as you can see, we're going to bring that up for you. 20% live in social housing. One thing that you may not see on this board behind me is that 1 in 6 households helped are currently or recently employed. And I want to end here. Some of the causes of food insecurity. I want to bring that up. The 2 important things: stagnant wages and precarious unemployment, or employment rather. Now, as food inflation rates rise, it has caused, get this number, 4 million Canadians to be in a food insecure situation. Staggering. Canada has the highest food inflation rate in the developed world, which costs increasing 5% since last year. That's how much it's increasing. The increasing costs associated with housing are causing a lot of Canadians to have to choose between paying their rent, mortgage, or, as you can see here behind me, food.
Coming up, who are the working poor in Canada? Meet the researcher who set its definition. Also, we ask how faith in God is helping some Canadians face poverty.
Parliament, several times over the last 20 years, has voted very clearly against legalizing assisted suicide or euthanasia. Over 500 people a year are put to death without their knowledge or consent.
We've been on different sides of this. I think this is alarming for Canada. You think this is a great move for patient rights?
I wouldn't say it's great, but I would say it's necessary. So a very small percentage of patients will have intolerable pain. We won't be able to help them.
We'll never have this kind of legislation arriving in our country again for the first time.
Youth who feel a generation spent with no Canadian law protecting fetal life at any stage is wrong.
1/4 of my generation has been killed through abortion.
We can't just compromise women's rights or take those rights away in order to recognize the rights of fetuses.
Until I think we really get a sense of who these unborn babies really are, we're not going to be changing people's minds because we won't have yet changed their hearts.
Working paycheck to paycheck and still struggling to make ends meet is a reality many face in this country. Working poor is defined as living with a job that earns you between $3,000 and $22,000 a year. Our Sheldon Neal spoke to the researcher who set the definition for working poor. Take a look.
The term working poor seems like perhaps an oxymoron when you hear it. Let's start here. Define the term working poor for us.
I define it in terms of the amount of income that actually comes into a family or a single person. You have to make a threshold amount of at least $3,000, and that's also the threshold amount for the federal working income tax benefit. So it has a symmetry there. And then at the upper end, we put it at half the median income of Canadians. So for a single person, that's around $22,000 a year, and for a family of 4, it's about $44,000 a year.
Now let's put a face to this term working poor. Who are they?
The largest single job for the working poor is in retail and in food services, coffee pourers, cleaners, people who serve food. That's the ranks. They're very, very visible in our society.
Now, governments in this country have vowed to end poverty, specifically child poverty, for many years now. I'm wondering, is this a pipe dream, or is there truly light at the end of this tunnel?
When you think that our whole income security system now costs about $178 billion, which is about 8.5% of GDP, if we were to increase our spending by 1.5 percentage points on the people at the very bottom, that includes people on social assistance as well as the working poor, then we could have everybody in Canada out of poverty. It seems like a simple thing to do, but in fact we would have to provide very large amounts of income security to people right at the bottom in order to make that happen.
Raising the minimum wage won't lift poverty, will it?
Well, it certainly would for single persons, because you're looking at the need for child benefits and other sorts of things, child care, lots of services and supports that you're otherwise going to need for people in family situations. But a higher minimum wage, you have to then think about the number of hours they actually get. So if you're looking at somebody who's working in the food service industry, traditionally, they get 30 to 32 hours a week. They don't get 40 hours. If they got 40 hours of work, it would take them out of poverty, but they don't get that.
Anti-poverty advocates in New Brunswick say the Liberal government's plan to increase minimum wage to $11 an hour this spring won't lift people out of poverty in the province. What are your thoughts on that?
A federal minimum wage only applies to federal employees and those governed by those federal type programs. Generally speaking, the bulk of minimum wage workers are actually covered under provincial law. So if the province doesn't tag along with the federal government, then you're not going to see those increases.
What does the everyday life experience for a working poor Canadian look like?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of people who are in split shifts, so you have to start thinking about transit. They're going to be living not necessarily on a subway line because that's where the rents are going to be the highest. So you're looking at people who usually have to travel a lot to get to the job in the first place where the job actually is. And you see them in terms of needing childcare if they have children. You need to see them as people who don't have a lot of bandwidth. In other words, they're always in a hurry. They're always trying to get to something. And in fact, you might find that the person who's actually serving food downtown or cleaning an office might themselves have to go to a food bank on the way home just to make ends meet.
The Liberal government's national housing strategy, pouring $11 billion into affordable housing, in a sense trying to open the doors, if you will, to as many Canadians with low incomes to have a chance at affordable housing. I'm wondering, do you see this helping the working poor in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. Wherever you have, and especially the idea of a portable housing benefit, which is something that the federal government has started to talk about. Right now we only have place-based subsidies. We call it social or subsidized housing. But if you're able to get that housing benefit and have it move with you, then that's an important part of the equation of getting people out of poverty. We like to talk about shelter as being one of those, a different type of payment. In other words, you have to pay the rent. You can't pay 90% of it. You can't scrimp on it. Whereas with food and other things, you might be able to scrimp and save a little bit. So housing is just one of those linchpin items, and all we can do, and especially to have people living closer in the working poor population. If they can live closer to their job, then they can actually make ends meet and have a better life.
Thank you so much for joining us.
All right.
Sheldon and John Stapleton. Well, help for poverty is the mission of Christians Against Poverty. From that group, debt coach Jan Disselkoen and Roland Nathaniel. Welcome, both of you. Jan, a debt coach, tell me what kind of clients you've got and what you're hearing from them.
Well, from clients that are actually working and not on benefits, I'm hearing young moms who have kids that need childcare, who have to borrow money from a neighbor in order to get her car fixed, and then is reluctant to speak to the neighbor again because she doesn't have the money to pay back. She's got a good job, but it's just over the line of where she can go to a food bank or get that kind of help. She earns just a bit too much. And with a mortgage and a car payment and kids and daycare, life is really, really tough for her. Another client of mine found out with a week's notice that she was laid off of a contract job she had. So you get this precarious work where people aren't sure where they're going to be working in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Roland, you left the bank to go work in finance counseling at Christians Against Poverty. Why would you think there needs to be more education on this issue and leave a great career like that?
Well, I think the reality is that there are a lot of mixed messages out there. I think that there's a lot of social marketing. I think that we get all kinds of information coming at us, and it's hard to sometimes pick through that and being able to understand it in a practical sense. Simple skills like developing a budget, knowing how to plan the usage of your money before you even have it in your hand is not something that everybody has the opportunity to learn.
So they're more literate on all the things that they're out there to buy than how to get the money to actually pay for them.
Well, those are the messages that you keep hearing, right? I mean, you only have to turn on the TV, or listen to the radio, even just talk to your friends about the latest and greatest thing.
Okay, on the website of Christians Against Poverty, you have 37% of the people you surveyed have considered suicide because that's how desperate poverty feels. Jan, Nathaniel, both of you, how does a relationship with God help that kind of despair? Jan.
Well, one of the first things we do with clients when we meet them in their homes and they've just unburdened themselves to us with the debt that they have, we offer to pray for them. And lots of clients aren't Christians, but they accept that. And when you pray to God and say, thank God for the courage of this person and bring their needs to God in prayer, it moves them to tears.
And Nathaniel, what is the edge that you think a connection to God brings to the financial despair?
Well, I think that it's identity, right? I think many of the people that we're dealing with, especially those that are in that suicidal, having suicidal tendencies or suicidal thoughts, it's because they don't feel valuable. They don't feel like they have worth. And it's just gotten to a point where even in our society, that's the message that they hear. And so it seems like a way out. But we know that with our faith, Christ died for all of us, that we have immense worth to him. And being able to introduce somebody to that, for them to be reminded of that, if maybe they're off their faith journey, it means a lot. And it brings them back to that place where they understand that they have a future and that they can get out of their situation.
Roland Nathaniel, Jan Disseldorn, thank you for coming to speak about Christians Against Poverty. Lots more about you both and the work that you do on our website and where you can get help. Thank you. Coming up, working poor by choice. We speak with one woman who says yes. And we tackle poverty on a practical level, asking how God fits in the middle of it all.
I'm Molly Thomas in northern Somalia. Think back to 2011 and the famine that wiped out more than 250,000 people in the Horn of Africa. Locals here tell us that this one is worse. We'll tell you why.
Josie Lacourte is a working poor millennial by Canada's definition. Though some would call it unorthodox, she says she's actually has her life right where she wants it. Josie, welcome to Context.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start here. You willfully decided to not get a standard 9-to-5 job so you can better position yourself to follow your interests, despite knowing that because of that, you might statistically fall into what Canada would define as the working poor. Why?
Why? Because I feel like we all have a purpose in life, and I think that you are called to bringing it to pass. Like at the end of your life, God's gonna look at you and be like, I gave you all of this to do. If I go work at a 9-to-5, I'm working somebody else's vision and it's not my own. So that's the reason. Working someone else's vision and not your own. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. What does it mean to be a millennial who is, as Canada would say, a working poor, but yet living in one of Canada's most expensive cities? What is that experience like? I think it's just about staying on budget. Like you can look really good and stay on budget. Luckily I live with my parents, so it's not like a big deal in terms of like me paying rent or anything crazy like that. But you can look good, buy boots that are $15 and still like rock it out. And I think that's what it's all about, just using your budget wisely. I have another question I want to get to, but I have some time to unpack something. Working somebody else's vision and not your own. Briefly, can you unpack that a little bit for us in terms of your choice to fall into that Canada working poor? I feel like we all have a thing that like burns our heart. And for me, I just want to help other youth realize their vision and realize their goals and their dreams. And as a brand consultant, I help bring people's visions to life. So why would I work under somebody else when I'm called to unpack your vision and bring it to life? So I find that I have to put myself in a position that maybe right now I technically fall into that category, so I won't ever have to fall into that category again. Someone's watching this and they could be saying, oh, well, there goes the typical millennial, living at home, living off of the parents' money. They don't have that firm grasp of what it really means to economically survive in this world. What do you say to that? Especially when they say, oh, she has to pay her dues. She hasn't done that yet. What would be your response to that? Well, I have my own student debt. I never told my parents, come give me money. So I have to pay, I have to figure out how I'm gonna pay that. It's on pause right now, technically, because I fall into this bracket, but I don't plan to be in the bracket for long. So it's about hustling. Yes, my student loan is on pause. I could be collecting interest at this very moment, but that's my personal choice. So then I actually want to pay it off in a year. So hopefully in a year's time, I won't fall into that bracket any longer. Josie, thank you for your time and for also allowing us to rethink what it means or what the term means to be working poor. Inspiring. Thank you so much. Following your heart. I want to keep this conversation going because we're still trying to discover what does it mean to be live in Canada and be a working poor? How do we lift people out of poverty? Joining me right now is Anthony Burke. Now he helps people overcome poverty. He is CEO of the Legacy Capital Group and a financial planner who counsels people in financial
financial stress. He's also the author of the book, Generational Wealth is More Than Money, 16 Powerful Principles that will help you uncover wealth. Sir, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start here. Why is it important to teach financial strategy and fundamentals?
I think, keeping in line with the topic of today's session, one of the things we're finding is that a lot of people are struggling. A lot of people need to understand how to manage their money. One of the things we teach is that how you manage your money is how you manage you. And if you don't manage yourself well, then ultimately you won't manage your money well. So the importance of understanding how money has a role in everything that you do. The important thing is that we teach individuals how to really look at money as not the source of our supply, but really God is the source of our supply.
Someone is watching this and they're saying, what does the Bible teach on poverty and getting out of there and poverty relief? What does the Bible say about that?
We sometimes get ourselves in trouble because we have what people call a prosperity message. But I can't understand a God if he's not a God of prosperity. So I think one of the things that we are very much in line with what we teach is that God is like any good father. He is interested in the care and the well-being of his children. So prosperity is in line with a loving God that loves his children. It means the best.
I want to push back at you. Someone opens up their bank account, it reads zero.
Right.
What does God do in that moment? Why does it matter? The count says zero.
That's perfect. Perfect
What
question.
happens?
And so that's exactly what we're teaching, that wealth is a whole lot more than money. Most people have equated wealth with their bank account, what their bank account says, that bottom line. But if you really understand wealth, wealth is more than the dollar figure. We've used in many circumstances, the wrong metrics to determine value. And a lot of people, they find themselves in depressing circumstances or situations really taking an outside metric to determine their own value, and it's a mistake. If you really understand the wealth and the deposit that's placed in you, it's a lot better picture to see what your value is, that it's not really tied to a paycheck or to what your employer may say your worth. Your value is an internal thing that's really ultimately given by God.
I want to throw this question at you. Someone may be looking at you and say, well, he has a nice suit, he looks well put together, but that hasn't always been your story. Growing up, you came from humble beginnings. Give us a picture of that.
Well, I grew up in what called in Scarborough, and so one parent home. My mother raised us, and I'm very familiar with having to be creative in food choices and going to certain places in the grocery store in order to buy your foods because we weren't able to afford sort of the higher priced items. So I'm very familiar with that. But again, with that being said, I think one of the most important things to really teach individuals is that we don't have to play a role for anyone. Where we are does not determine who we are. And most people make a mistake of taking a look at their circumstances to determine who they are, but it's a mistake. We are much more than our circumstances tell us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. Great principle shared.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
People have a lot of opinions about the term working poor, so how about we conclude with a look at an insider on this. I'd argue Jesus himself could be considered a member of the working poor. He had a job as a carpenter for a while, but he was still poor. For the main job, living as a human, Jesus and his disciples relied on the generosity of those they met on the road for food and shelter. Jesus was and still is a friend of the poor and the rich. And Jesus spent time teaching about the attitude we should have towards money. So followers of Jesus do engage about money. Jesus's followers lobby for people to be paid a living wage, and they help come up with financial plans for those in debt. Jesus's followers speak out against precarious working conditions, and they give financially to the needy. Followers of Jesus make food for the hungry, and Jesus's followers are called to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Jesus called us to treat others as we want to be treated, so we've got to show compassion and generosity to those who are struggling. I don't think we have to look too far to find somebody nearby, and our calling is probably right there, helping someone who we know who's struggling financially. Check out our website, help people get connected to Christians Against Poverty. Know that there's a helping hand there to get you through the next day. I'm Lorna Dueck from all of us at Context. Thanks for joining us, and join us again next week.